5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my privilege to welcome you to today's webinar. It's on the joy of giving. I'm going to introduce my subject matter expert in a moment, but there's something significant. Every webinar we did previously was on a Wednesday, and we switched to Tuesday because I want to wish everyone a happy Giving Tuesday. And this is a great concept. I think now it's 9 years old, and it's been growing every year. And it's about encouraging people to do good. And that can be by donating time and money or whatever. Last year, Giving Tuesday pumped $2.5 billion into the nonprofit sector. And we think this year we'll hear the results pretty quickly. Might even be more robust. We're also, for our Jewish friends, I believe this is the third night of Hanukkah. And so we want to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah. And by the way, for fundraisers, this is a great time. You know, we are like in baseball, we track everything. And December is make or break time because we estimate that 1/3 of annual giving happens in the month of December. And the last 3 days of December alone constitute 12% of annual giving. So it's not too late. I'm not too great on math, but I believe then after today, we'll have 31 days a year, 31 days left in the year. I promised Michael Rubin I wouldn't show a lot of slides with text on it. This is my exception. I'm a frustrated football coach, and I've spoken to our guests. And some of the things we want to emphasize that everybody involved in making a gift, be it the donor, the solicitor, or of course the beneficiary, they come out ahead. It's not a zero-sum game. And Michael Rubin's going to share some research findings, but in every way you can measure it, donors benefit when they make gifts. It's good for your health, it's good for your spirit and your mentality, and it's sure good for your country. And at this point, I'd like to welcome a fairly new friend, Michael Rubin, but he's done about all of it in the world of fundraising. He began, like a lot of us, as a practitioner. I believe you were a fundraiser and learned in the healthcare sector. You learned the zoos. And if I have it right, in 2002, you formed your own consulting firm, which surprisingly enough is named Michael D. Rubin and Associates. So first, by the way, let me thank you not only for participating and sharing your wisdom in this webinar, but you truly have provided 40 years of service and leadership to the nonprofit sector. So Michael, welcome to the Nonprofit Empowerment Webinar Series. You're based in St. Louis. Let me start with a real tough question. What's the weather like in St. Louis today?
The weather's not bad today, 50s, and I think we had some sun. It's not bad.
Okay, I think there's a question, it could be close to your heart. Tell us a little about Michael D. Rubin and Associates. There are a lot of fundraising companies out there. How is Michael D. Rubin and Associates different than the competition?
Sure, happy to. Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, for asking me to participate in this. It's you know, I still have a little trepidation at times doing these, but you made me very comfortable and you're very prepared and all that, so it's great. Our firm has been around. Next year will be 20 years, which is just remarkable to me. And our firm exists to empower nonprofits to achieve their missions and dreams. And what does that really mean? That means that we want to be mission aligned with what we stand for and what the nonprofit stands for. And it took me a while to figure that out. As you know, as time went on, and I learned a lot in terms of consulting. Sometimes there are clients that are just not a good fit for the consultant, and it's okay to say no to that too. We live through our values, and our values are partnership, reliability, wisdom, listening, and integrity. I think the listening part is really key, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today in terms of the joy of giving, because I just think that's such a critical skill. I really do. The other thing that I'd just like to share is that we really pride ourselves on being an extension of the nonprofit staff. So it's one thing to be able to give, wisdom and advice to nonprofits, and that's all great. It's a whole different thing to actually execute it. And we work a lot with smaller to mid-sized nonprofits, not exclusively, but that's kind of our sweet spot. And a lot of times they don't have, development staff of 20 people. They have 2 people or 3 people.
Right.
So
if I hear you right,
be practical.
if you were working for my nonprofit, Reuben Associates is not just going to help tell us what to do, you're going to help us get it done.
Right. We roll up our sleeves, we write proposals, we do research, we do strategy, we support you, and we guide you. So we're sort of there every step of the way, very hands-on.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to ask our producer, Michael Largent with Game Day Media, to explain there are 2 ways our learning community audience can share comments and questions. One is to type it in the chat space, but we rather see you. And so anytime, I have lots of questions planned for Michael Rubin, but we discussed it. This is for the audience. So anytime you want a point of clarification or we say something that triggers a question, Michael, tell people how they can get on camera.
Sure. So like Jim said, there's 2 different ways. If you have a question, you can go ahead and type it into the chat space. But what we would really prefer is that you turn on your camera and then unmute your microphone and then actually ask the question yourself whenever we come to a break. So those are your 2 options.
And by the way, I'd like to welcome another new member of our learning community. If she could turn her mic on. I hope I get this name right. Reitza Garcia. How did I do in pronouncing your name? Do you hear me, Reitza? Can you unmute she has to unmute your microphone, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
You did
okay.
very well, sir. Yes. I had to find my unmute button.
Okay, by the way, I believe this is your first time. Welcome to our learning community. And can I ask, what is your nonprofit and what's your location?
I work for the University of Texas at San Antonio.
Guess who worked there about 1 million years ago? Jim Eskin. That was my first development job.
I've heard.
Hopefully good things you've heard.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
What's your area of responsibility there?
The College of Education and Human Development.
Right. And by the way, we've had Carl on this show several times, so you have a great leader.
Absolutely. I agree.
Okay, and so anytime you have a question, let us know. Michael, this is sort of a macro question. We've just gone through in the nonprofit sector and every sector, 18 months like we've never seen before. What do you think we learned about philanthropy during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's the question that everybody's asking, and I think we're all still trying to figure it out. The one thing that I would observe with our clients certainly is, look, we've experienced something like we've never experienced before, and it was a world that was very uncertain and out of control. And one thing that we could control during this period is doing good in the world and making a gift.
Yes,
And
yes,
so,
yes.
I think that that explains some of the behavior that we're seeing, where people stepped up to the plate to give to other people who are directly affected by COVID, or in some ways indirectly. The other thing that we see is there's definitely research out there where people think of their favorite charities as sort of like their kids, especially people who don't have kids.
Yeah.
And real kids. And so it's a time where you want to sort of bring those who you care about in close to you and take care of them. And I think we saw quite a bit of that too, particularly with bigger donors, but certainly that the overall giving seems to be substantially increased. Not so sure about the number of donors, but that's another story we can get to a little later.
Hey, let's zero in on today's topic. What specifically is joyous about giving? What does that really mean to a donor? And how does unleashing that feeling open the gates to future and bigger gifts?
Right. So, on the one hand, it seems pretty obvious, like, why would anybody do something that didn't bring them joy?
Yeah.
But you have to dig a little bit deeper into that. I particularly like Penelope Burke, who has done lots and lots of research on donor-centered fundraising. And people give because of the emotional connection as well as the possibility of making a difference, of doing good. Let me just read one quote or a couple of quotes from Penelope's research, and these are donors that she's interviewed over the years. Many could remember the first time they gave and what it felt like. And all these years later, it still feels the same. Giving is a rush. It's an emotional act as well as an intellectual decision that may be the culmination of many years thinking about giving. So be conscious of how donors feel when they give, and it makes it easy to respond in kind. And she's got story after story of people who were giving because they have an emotional connection in it. And the more they feel good and the staff of the organization responds in kind, they feel equally as charged up. That begets other giving.
Yeah.
So just one example, I could give you many, but I love the examples that she uses in her research.
Michael, I just wanted to tell you some general background in the audience, and we call our audience a learning community. We have, and I love it, the variety of directors of developments and CEOs, some executive directors. We have board chairs, board members, volunteers, donors, and we like having that diversity. And we like to say everyone has some wisdom to share. And so I invite our audience, again, if you have something to share as Michael and I go through. By the way, I'm guilty. I'm going to skip through a lot of slides here because I want to get to the Q&A with Michael. But at this point, I'd like everybody to type in the chat space your name, your role, your nonprofit, and the location. And then Michael Largent, and particularly look for cities. I know we tend to be a little more San Antonio and Texas because that's what I started with, but I'm proud. I'm seeing close to all 50 states. And that, Michael, that's the beauty of the webinar. So type in your name, your role, your nonprofit, and what your location is. What type of cities are you seeing, Michael Argent?
All right, so we've got Diana Hoyt from Phoenix, and she's a consultant.
Yeah,
we've got,
she's, by the way, I want to put a plug in, Diana, Michael, and I, but I'm the new kid in the block. We're all members of the Association of Philanthropic Counsel, which tries to raise the bar in our profession. And thank you, Michael and Diana, for the leadership you have provided that organization. Okay, any other cities?
We've got Margie Hellshine, President America Connected, and Boca Raton, Florida.
Hey, Michael, you know who's playing golf this afternoon?
And we've got Colleen Polak, CEO, Homeworks in St. Louis.
Okay.
Koval Lindstrom, Grants and Donor Relations Coordinator for Project Quest in San Antonio. We've got Karen Friedman in Chicago. Al Hartman, board member of the University Health Foundation in San Antonio. Nancy Friedman, volunteer board member and donor in Houston.
Good.
Looks like that's everyone so far.
Well, we welcome, and we're going to give you one other assignment. The mantra of our show, Michael, is nonprofit strong. So if I'd like, the last time you'll be asked to type something in, if everybody could type in the chat room space, we're nonprofit strong, because Michael, what are we?
We are nonprofit strong.
That's right. And I'm going to skip through a couple of slides here because I want to get to the Q&A with Michael. By the way, do you know, one of my favorite, there are 1.5 million nonprofits in the country. There are about 100,000 in Texas, about 6,000 in San Antonio. And most of them, as you see here, they're under $500,000 in their annual budget. And you know, Michael, our nonprofit friends were experts at stretching nickels into dimes. I think over the last year, they've stretched them into quarters. And let me ask you a question here. What do you think we learned as far as fundraising, and particularly major gifts, that you could do virtual? What could you do virtual, and what still had to be done in person? How did that play out in your eyes?
Yeah, that's another question that everyone's still trying to figure out. Look, we have lots of tools available to us now. If you're in nice weather, you can go see people in person and sit outside if they're comfortable. You can sit on somebody's porch. You can visit with them via Zoom. You can use the old-fashioned phone, and you can email back and forth. But we all know that the very best results and the best interactions with people, I think, tend to come in person, sitting in the room, because you can read people's body language.
Yeah.
You can get the sense of warmth, or if they're concerned about something or nervous about something. It's just easier to understand that. And look, as fundraising professionals, we are, this is about, individuals and people's emotions and what their motivations are. And so you have to be able to listen and understand that. And the best way to do it is in person. However, you do what you can with the situation that you've got. We still work with an organization, a small art museum in Owensboro, Kentucky. And at the beginning of the pandemic, they did not want to ask anybody for a gift. Nobody. They felt like it would be insensitive. And it took them quite a while to come around to actually doing Zoom visits and solicitations. Then they found it wasn't so bad. And if that's the way they were going to get to people, that's great. We also owe our nonprofits, it's kind of our obligation and our duty to be asking.
Right.
No matter in what setting. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to meet your mission and have the gas in the tank to get you where you want to go. So I think once people figured that part out, they adapted by and large. I've also seen, I saw some great articles in the Chronicle of Philanthropy about people being very creative during this time. They would, instead of having breakfast with somebody at a restaurant, they would send in advance a basket of coffees,
right,
or muffins or something, and then they would be on Zoom and be eating breakfast together. They couldn't be physically together, but it was the next best thing. I love that kind of creativity. I think that was a very, very good solution. So it isn't the ultimate being on Zoom, but it's pretty good.
It's better than having no contact. A lot better.
Exactly.
And by the way,
I'd love to hear other people's experiences too.
There have been so many heroes over the last year that we wanted to talk a moment. Mackenzie Scott and Dan Jewett have donated over $9 billion. It just is mind-boggling. And get this, that $9 billion was unrestricted. We feel lucky in San Antonio because our nonprofits got way over $100 million. Rachel Garcia's with UTSA, they got 40 million. And so we've seen a lot of the big philanthropists really step up. Okay. I'm going to go the several questions I have ready for Michael, but at any time, we encourage you to butt in, be a Budinsky.
Jim, could I
and
ask a question?
Al Hartman. Okay, Al is with the University Health System Foundation. You have a question?
Yes, Mr. Rubin, thank you so much for your comments and your presence today. In regard to virtual versus in person, how significant is the age factor? And I will tell you what I hear from, now I'm a certified senior citizen. So but I hear from friends who that don't want to go to Zoom meetings. They don't want to communicate on virtual, but almost without exception, these are older, individuals, I would say 50, 60 and above. Now, do you have any comment on the age factor?
I'd like Michael to go there, and I'll have some comments too. Michael, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think just like you, I've seen some of that, but I think more than anything, there's a couple of things involved. Number one, the donor or prospective donor just has to feel comfortable. And if they're not comfortable, that's not a good situation to be in. So I think you have to ask the question, how are you comfortable? Yeah. And if they're not comfortable doing it on Zoom, then, can we sit outside at a park if the weather cooperates? Yeah. Or, we've had plenty of meetings at our house on the back porch, the screened in porch. Right. And that with a fan on, and that works too. But the other piece is, I think you have to give people options. I love that. And you can't assume that there's, just because everyone jumped on Zoom, that's the way everybody's comfortable. But it wouldn't be any different than being sensitive to that in normal times. You have to ask people where they're comfortable and meet them where they're comfortable. That would be my and Michael, I think we got to be careful about keeping to outdated stereotypes, because I think the last 18 months forced people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s not necessarily to keep in contact with a nonprofit, but to keep in contact with loved ones and grandchildren. And I know many folks, north of 75 that, really use Zoom. And I think that's been a positive development from the pandemic. The technology is really extended to a much larger audience. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Hey,
Michael, you like me have been in the business for close to 40 years. You like me started when you were 6 years old, right? Exactly. But seriously, during the course of your 40-year career, what do you think has changed the most in fundraising, and what hasn't changed at all?
Yeah, I certainly, technology is just a huge part of what we do all the time, whether it's databases or companies that do wealth analytics, or even, we're getting into artificial intelligence now, which, I understand a little bit of, but not too much. Those are all great tools. And that's exactly what they are. They're tools that help us do our jobs better and more efficiently. But what hasn't changed is donors' desires to really do good and to really make an impact and really make a difference and to feel good, doing it. And, as I talked to you, Jim, in preparing for this, and sort of relying on some mentors and almost idols of mine, Jerry Panis was one of the consultants who unfortunately passed away about 5 years ago, something like that.
1990. I mean, 2010, not that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, maybe it's been 10 years, but I loved going back to his book, and I had the pleasure of spending about a half day with him in
Oh,
St.
wow.
Louis about 10 years ago. Oh, maybe a little more than 10 years ago. So was just an incredible person, humble, and he really, sort of broke it down into the basics. And that's why I like what he said a lot, because when it comes down to it, when you're talking to people about supporting your organization, it's Jim and I were just talking about this earlier. It's really just a matter of having a conversation between friends about a cause that you care about. And that's kind of what Jerry Panis was all about. He kept it simple. He related one-on-one to people extremely well. He listened really well. And I think all those skills are just critical. And so those are the things that haven't changed. I think, if anything, people want to make more of a difference. And I will tell you that, I've also had the pleasure of going through research and interviews that were done by Dr. Michael Moody in Michigan, and Sharna Goldseeker. They did a whole research study on Gen X giving, and it's still pretty much the same. They definitely want to emphasize strategic philanthropy, and there's a strategic component to it, but what they say is giving from the head warms the heart.
Yeah.
So there's still an emotional and joyous component of what we're doing, even if people of this generation and even millennials want to give it a little bit different ways. So it just
By the way,
remind ourselves.
I need to fact check myself. I think Gerald Panis passed away in 2018. It wasn't that long ago.
Okay,
and
2018.
He was active to the last moment.
Yeah.
Michael, how do we know donors are enjoying making their gifts to our nonprofits as much as we are receiving them?
Yeah, great question. You have to listen and you have to observe. So that's one thing. I'll tell you a story from my healthcare days, because I feel like that embodies this concept. So we worked with a family who had triplets, premature triplets, and two of the triplets passed away because they were born so prematurely. The one triplet survived and thrived over time. And the grandparents were so grateful that they eventually wound up making a $500,000 gift to support the renovation of the NICU, of the neonatal intensive care unit. And so we were getting ready to celebrate the gift and do all the recognition. And we said to them, what we'd really like to do is have a big gathering at the hospital and invite friends, family, patients, nurses, doctors, techs, people who knew you. And they said, oh, we don't want to do that. We don't want to trouble everybody. That's not really our style. We don't need to be patted on the back or anything. But eventually we wore them down, the development staff, and we convinced them to have this reception. And they couldn't explain why they were so overwhelmed, but they were completely overwhelmed. They completely turned 180 on it, because they saw people who really cared, that they appreciated the medical team's expertise and what they had done and what they were going to do for future generations. And they were just blown away by the whole experience. So how can you tell? I mean, it was completely obvious to us, but that sort of brought out a joy that they never expected, because they didn't want their name up in lights, really.
Yeah.
But they got thanked, and they got thanked by everybody on all levels. So I always remember that story.
That's a great story. Hey, let's get into the mechanics a little. After prospect identification, we have something called cultivation to forge a personal and emotional link between the donor prospect and the mission of our organization. How long of a cultivation phase is necessary for a nonprofit to get a major gift?
You know, there's all kinds of things out there that are written that say you need 7 touches. That's probably not even the right word to say anymore. 7 interactions, meaningful interactions with people. And that could be, you know, meetings with the president or a program director, or it could be with a development person, whatever. I don't know. I think that you have to be observant, and I think you have to listen, and I think you have to be curious and ask open-ended questions, and people will pretty much tell you. They know why you're there. So if they weren't interested in helping in some way, or at least thinking about it, they wouldn't have taken a meeting with you. So you have, once you get that meeting, you're kind of over the hump.
Yeah.
Really. So I don't know how to answer that, and I don't think there's a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
But I believe if you're paying attention, the donor will actually give you the signs and tell you. And if you're not sure, you can always say, we're doing a campaign for the neonatal intensive care unit that is going to make a difference in these 3 ways. I know you've had some experience that would help here, and I know you care. Would now be a good time to talk about what might be possible? And you're essentially asking their permission to do it.
Hey,
it seems like the most logical thing in the world, but when you're in the heat of the moment, you don't always remember that you're just having a conversation with somebody.
Right.
And if you're not sure, you ask.
Yeah. And by the way, this is very closely related. Your best future donors are always your current donors. What are the indicators of a current donor is ready to make a larger gift?
Yeah, that can take a lot of different forms. You know, when I was working in hospitals a lot, we would always think about people who had lost a loved one in recent years, and if that was a great way to remember them through a gift and the recognition of that gift, because it isn't always about getting your own name up in lights. Could be a loved one or a family member. You know, another way of doing that is, this is a complete opposite end of the spectrum here. You know, I love using the tool of a gift table. So for those of you that, or a gift pyramid. So for those of you that don't know that terminology, if you're doing a campaign that is for $10 million, you know you're going to need a certain number of gifts at $1 million, and a few more at $500,000, and a few more at various levels all the way down. It shows the donor that you've thought it through, and that it's not all 10 million is probably not going to come from one person or one entity. And it helps the donor sort of figure out where they fit into the mix.
Yeah.
So if they know they can't make a $100,000 gift, we know we need a bunch of $25,000 gifts. So it's another way of doing, and a similar way of doing that is to be able to tell a story of a donor who also was in a similar place, who made a $25,000 gift, let's say. And so it's kind of norming.
Here's another question. I know it's on the minds of a lot of our learning community. What is your advice on setting giving expectations for board members of nonprofits?
Oh, that's a good one. Boy, as a consultant, we see that one a lot. And there are different ways of getting into it, and it depends very much on the culture of the organization. There's a few things that you can do. One is, even before you recruit somebody onto the board, you make it clear what the expectations are. Just like you were interviewing for a job that paid you something. You'd want to know what the job description was, what the expectations are, and what the financial expectations are. So some organizations will say, we want everyone on our board to make a meaningful gift, or sometimes they use the terminology leadership gift. some boards actually say, we would like you strongly to consider a gift of $1,000
Yeah.
or a minimum of $1,000 or whatever. If you go to a big city art museum, they will tell you, we don't even want you unless you're going to make a $50,000 gift or a $25,000 gift. So, and I think universities can be like that too. So it's setting the expectations, I think, is really important. The other, I think, does that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah. And
Okay.
and by the way, I like the terminology personally significant, because if you were to ask Jim Eskin, Michael Rubin, and Jeff Bezos, what is a personally significant level, you're going to get three very different answers.
Right.
And so I think you have to realize that board members have different circumstances during different phases of their life. But you want to get 100% board giving. That is so important.
Yeah, you know, the other piece of that, I try to turn the tables too. So it's very hard to ask somebody for a gift as a board member if you haven't done it yourself.
Right.
The flip side of that is it's so much easier to ask somebody if you're in already and you believe in the cause so deeply that you've given your own support. And I don't mean corporate support. I mean, you have to make a personal gift too. We have plenty of people who represent corporations and foundations. Foundations are a little different, but the corporate gift isn't enough. You have to give something as an individual. And then you can ask somebody to join you. It's such a simple phrase, but it's so powerful because you're not asking somebody to do something that you haven't already done yourself. Right. It's just a very simple, powerful.
Al, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Reuben, I get the sense here that we're talking about donors who are very familiar with your nonprofit. They know what you do and whatnot. What about if you're a nonprofit and you want to reach out to the business community and whatnot? How important is it that your story has been well told and that when you contact them, they know who you are, or more importantly, who you represent? How important is that?
Meaning that if you're trying to make almost a cold call on an individual or a company, yes. And they don't necessarily, and they would say, I don't even know anything about your organization. Is that what you're?
If you get a response, yes. I mean,
yeah. So
how much would you recommend to nonprofits to tell their story?
Yeah, look, that's why it takes time to develop relationships, because in all likelihood, somebody who's not familiar with your organization is not going to give right away. And so the first visit is more likely going to be introducing yourself, telling them who you represent, what your organization stands for, what their mission is all about, and how we help, how we change lives or save lives. And then you might just leave it at that and come back another time. You know, our instinct is to want to try to ask right away. And I just don't think it's a very wise thing to do, because you're trying to build long-term relationships. Yeah. Maybe not for $10 gifts, but even those are, can be long-term relationships. And there are plenty of times when people who make consistent $10 and $25 gifts over time wind up leaving a lot in their wills to an organization. So you just can never tell. But look, we had a client, have a client now that's a charter school system, and charter schools, it's a little bit different kind of fundraising, because they, at least in Missouri, they get support from the state based on so many students per day in classes, but it falls far short of what they really need, at least in Missouri. Right. And so there's a case to be made for raising money, but they hadn't done it. They were starting a program from scratch. And so their board and their one development person had to go out and make cold calls and explain why charter schools deserve support and how they're making a difference in our city too. So it could take a while.
Yeah. And usually the bigger the gift expectation, the longer the cultivation period. Michael, this is another challenge for nonprofits. How do you suggest they handle a board member who is terrified of asking for a gift?
Yeah, I'm sure none of us have ever seen that in this crowd. I think there are lots of reasons for that, and I guess my first piece of advice would be to meet with the board member one-on-one and find out what's going on. You have to be a little bit of an amateur therapist when we do this, because it's about, you know, they're clearly fearful of something. So we have to find out a little bit gently about what that would be. In our experience as consultants, we see things repeating over and over. Number one, what we've all heard, you know, the board members say, I'll join the board, but I'll do anything but raise money.
Yeah.
But you know, when you peel back some of the layers, you find out a few things. Number one, they're scared because nobody's ever prepared them. You know, none of us stellar development people have prepared them to have a conversation with somebody. How do I get the appointment? What do I say? What do we need money for? What's the purpose of this discussion? What's the goal of our meeting today? What do we know about this person's background or their business or their family or their giving patterns, whether it's to our organization or anybody else's? So it really helps to have that information because you can make conversation from those little tidbits of information. So I think being prepared is a lot of it. And then, you know, when you're getting to the point where you're actually asking for money, you know, for the bigger gifts, certainly we help them organize their thoughts.
Yeah.
So we say, here are the kinds of things that you want to start out saying. And then we're going to have our CEO talk a little bit about this particular campaign. And then we're going to say, look, we're trying to raise $10 million here. We've already raised $6 million, so we're really doing great. We know you care about the organization. Would you like to be a part of this? And we're very clear about who's doing the asking, how much is going to be asked for, and we know that it's about the right number in the right ballpark. Yeah. So I think preparation is really, really important. And the other thing I tell people too is, if you're really nervous about this, you don't have to ask for the gift. It's enough to be able to say, to make the connection or to make the introduction and simply sit there. You know, as a board member, you're sort of like deputized.
Yeah.
You have power that you don't realize as a board member. And you say, I'm volunteering my time for this organization because I care so much about it that I want to spend my time volunteering. And I just thought that you two should meet because you have a lot in common. And then they can sit there and listen to the whole conversation after that.
Yeah. And
so
by the way,
introduction.
That's why I think that every board member should receive a quality solicitation of their own gift, because in many ways, that's the first step of introducing them to what a real ask is like.
Right, right. And the other thing I should have mentioned is you have to practice asking people just like you have to practice lots of things.
Yeah.
And so I have done practice solicitations with board members, or we've done role plays in front of the whole board. So we get some practice responding to people's objections. What happens if they say this? What happens if they're concerned about this? How do you respond? Which way do you go? How do you follow up so it doesn't go on forever? So, you know, It just takes practice. It's a skill that takes practice like other things.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest problems is fear of the unknown. Too many of our board members, they're familiar not with asking, but getting a gift. And there's a big difference. You know, Jim walks up to Al and literally flings a check for $1,000. That's not asking, that's getting. And that's why I think too many of our board members haven't seen an ask in which the solicitor is determining the timing, the amounts, and the purpose of the gift.
Right.
I have a lot of other questions for Michael, but I want to check again with our learning community. Does anybody else have a question or comment they'd like to share at this time? Koval, you were the first on. If any, you have any questions? I'm going to wait. If you just either you can type them in the chat space, or we'd love to have you come on camera. Michael, have you observed, you're like me, you've done about 4 decades because we started at age 6. Have you observed any significant differences in the way money is raised in different parts of the country?
Yes, I have. And I think I mentioned a little earlier in our webinar today. So we've been working with a small art museum in Owensboro, Kentucky for about 3 years. We did a campaign feasibility study for them where we determined what the community thought of their plan and how much they thought they could raise. And then we worked with them on a campaign. And they would rather send 10 letters to somebody than get in front of them and ask for a gift face to face.
Ouch! Ouch!
It's a cultural thing, and I didn't know what to do about it. And I asked some of my colleagues in other parts of the country, particularly the South, if that was cultural or maybe even reflective of the size of the community, because the communities, the city is about 55,000, the county is about 100, so it's not a small town. They've got some things going, but they will do almost everything they can to not pick up the phone or to be in front of somebody to at least have a conversation. Now they're getting better because they can invite people back into the museum now. And that's a comfortable place for them because they can show off the collection. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been as a consultant, it's been quite challenging to try to change that behavior. And we're still struggling with it.
I think the late Gerald Panis put it this way: you can't get milk from a cow by sending it a letter. You know, right. This is a hands-on business. We're coming to the wrap-up section. And again, just let us know in the audience if you have a question or comment. But Michael, I think you can quote, so there was scientific research about donors leading longer, healthier, and happier lives. That's just not something we've made up. There's scientific research to back that up.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And not only that, since I knew you were going to ask me this question, Jim, I validated it too. So when people help other people, and that includes definitely giving, there's a neurobiological reaction that takes place, and it's called the Happiness Trifecta, believe it or not. So when you do good things for other people and you help people by giving, you release dopamine, you release serotonin, and you release oxytocin. I hope I pronounced those right. And all those things boost your mood, and they also counteract the stress hormone, which is cortisol. So it is well documented that giving releases certain kinds of I don't know what they are. Are they? Well, it's stuff in your body. What'd you say, Diana?
Chemicals.
Chemicals. Thank you. It's well documented. So, and you know, our friend Dr. Russell James,
Yeah.
down in Texas, has done lots of neurobiological research, both around regular giving and planned giving, and how that, what effects that has in certain areas of the brain, and how it affects increases people's mood and improves their mood. So yeah, it's joyous. Don't forget that.
And by the way, I think if I heard you emphasize one theme, it is the importance of having conversations with donors. And this can be, you pointed out to me, you want to just rediscover why have they donated to your nonprofit?
Absolutely. And, you know, our friend Jerry Panis would always tell you to listen the gift. And at first I didn't really understand what that meant, but listening the gift really helps bring out the joy in giving. So he would tell the story that he wanted to buy a car. He went into a car dealership. He went into the first dealer, and the car salesperson spent 15 or 20 minutes talking about the axles and the power and the horsepower of the car and all the technical details, and didn't bother to ask one question about why they were interested in a car, what their family was like, how they were going to use it. Was it going to be their second or third car or their primary work car? None of that. And then he went into a second dealership, and the first questions out of the salesperson's mouth were all those kinds of things.
I love it.
And by the end of the 15 or 20 minutes of getting to know that, you know, Jerry Panis, they bought the car from the second person, you know, and what people want is to be heard. We hear it all the time with disgruntled donors. People are trying to be heard, but nobody's listening to them. So if you listen the gift, and Jerry Panis would say, talk 25% of the time, listen 75% of the time.
Right. And by the way, you introduced this theme that joyous giving leads to more joyous giving. Can you expand on that?
I can. There's both a neurobiological piece of that, which is if you do good and you feel better about it, you're going to naturally want to do more giving.
Yeah.
The other part of it is, you know, donors who are interested in giving and helping an organization and changing the world, they're really tend to be very enthusiastic about that cause. Right. And enthusiastic about their own giving. And they're also looking for that equal kind of response back for the nonprofit. So that doesn't mean taking 3 weeks to thank people. That means thanking them right away.
Hey, let's
them in a letter.
Let's talk a little about stewardship. I said you shared with me thank early and often. Expand on that.
It's something that I think has probably been drilled into all of us, at least those of us who've been around the field for a while, but it's also something that is just, you can't thank people enough. And I'll tell you, our friend, Dr. Russell James, actually has done some research on this, because people like to be thanked a lot. And there are built-in opportunities to thank people at every step of the process. If somebody makes an gift out of their assets, and they say, I'm going to make a pledge of $25,000 and I'm going to do it over 5 years. Well, think about what that process and that transaction is like. When they give you the news in person or over the phone, you're going to thank them immediately. You're going to go back and send them a formal acknowledgement, and you might send them several acknowledgements. Could be one from the CEO, could be one from the development person, could be one from the board chair, could be one from the program person.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're handwritten notes. We always remember handwritten notes.
I love handwritten notes. I love handwritten notes.
And then they say, I'm going to make my first gift this December, but will you remind me of that payment? And so you have a chance to thank them all over again and tell
Here's
them
the invitation.
tell them what difference their gift is making. And then you thank them for their payment. And then you give them a report at some point during the year. So it's when you think about it and analyze it, there's lots of built-in places where you can constantly thank people, and people loved being thanked. It doesn't have to be getting their name up in lights, but think about that process. I never heard it quite put in that way, but it's a long stream of thank yous over time.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, we're wrapping up here, but I've heard the theme conversation, and you've shared that a good conversation is with a donor. They speak 75% of the time. You, the nonprofit, speak 25% of the time. But as an active listener, there is so much power to asking open-ended questions. What are some of the right open-ended questions?
Boy, I have lots of them. I rely on this group too for a little bit of help, but certainly, look, it helps to know what their background is, a little bit about their family.
Yeah.
If they went to the university where you're raising money, then you can certainly ask them about why did they decide to go to that university to begin with? Who was your favorite professor? I mean, you have to have some natural curiosity about people in order to do this job. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
So you have to know a little something about the person going in, or even why did you take this meeting with me? You could be doing a million other things.
Yeah.
What about this organization is it that really moves you and that you care about? And most often nobody ever took the time to ask them that question.
Yeah.
So that's just a few. I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
You all have your own.
And does our audience, we just have a couple of minutes left. Do we have an audience member who'd like to share a question or comment? This is your time. Do we have anybody else there? Either type it in the chat space, better yet, come on camera with us. By the way, I like the theme, like you, Michael, friendships over relationships. That's what we want to forge with our donors. I once heard a relationship is something you have until something better comes along. A friendship is based on something that's going to endure, and you want your donor relationship or friendship to be sustained over time. Diana, anything to share on that theme?
Well, I think Michael said it earlier, and I think it's so critical, is the asking your donor why.
Mm-hmm.
If they're a past donor, why do they give to your organization? Usually that question is never asked. And I think it's the most important question. Thank
you. And by the way, Michael, this is one of my favorite closing segments. The late poet Maya Angelou said, people won't remember what you said. They won't even remember what you did. They will never forget how you made them feel. And our job in the nonprofit is to make Michael and Al and Diana and everyone else feel like the most important people in the world to our nonprofit. Michael, I like to give a money back guarantee, okay? This is Eskin's money back guarantee. Your chances of getting the gift go way up when you ask. And the only, I hate to say, there are cliches, the only bad ask is the ask not made. Any closing, Michael, the hour has just flown by. And again, thank you for the service and leadership you have provided the nonprofit sector and will continue to provide. Any closing comments?
I don't think so. I thank you for having me. I always like to learn from other people too. I'm far from knowing everything, far from it, and still learning even after 39 years in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So I applaud your dedication, all of you, and always happy to talk further with any of you about even just bouncing around ideas at any time.
Michael, I better warn you, when you do such a good job like you just did, we're going to invite you back next year to talk about another topic that's very crucial to the nonprofit sector. But thank you, Michael Rubin, for participating, and also the 40 years of service. I want to thank our learning community. We're actually going to take a couple of weeks off, and I believe our next webinar is on Wednesday, December 29th. And I'm real excited about that. We're going to get some reports on innovative nonprofit projects around the country. So again, I want to thank our learning community. You are the heroes. You are the professional and volunteer nonprofit leaders that have responded every time to crisis. And we could not have made it through the last 18 months without our amazing nonprofit professional and volunteer leaders. So what we're going to do, we're going to post a very short written summary of Michael's key points on LinkedIn and Facebook. Michael Largent's going to do a little spin dry on this webinar, and then we're going to share a recording for everybody who participated and for those who were unable to make it. So again, thank you, Michael Rubin, and thank you to our learning community audience, and stay safe. And remember, this is Giving Tuesday, and this is the giving month. 31% of annual giving happens in December, and 12% happens in the last 3 days of December. So go out there and ask. And thank you for your service and leadership. And that will conclude this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.